The first night alone at the Blackwood Museum was supposed to be easy money. Just me, the dusty exhibits, and the profound, suffocating silence. I'd done night shifts before, but this place, it felt different, heavy. The air itself seemed to hum with forgotten stories. I remember walking past the ancient Egyptian sarcophagi, their painted eyes staring out into the dim security lights, feeling a prickle on the back of my neck. It was just my imagination, I told myself, the old building settling. But then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the restricted wing, the one filled with artifacts they never displayed. My heart started to pound. I froze, listening. It stopped, but the feeling of being watched, that didn't go away. The silence that followed was worse than the tapping. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on me, making my own breathing sound impossibly loud in the vast, empty halls. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, straining my ears, trying to convince myself it was just the building, just old pipes, just the wind playing tricks. But the Blackwood Museum was built like a fortress. There was no wind whistling through these thick stone walls. And the tapping hadn't sounded like pipes. It had been deliberate, methodical. My flashlight, clutched tight in my sweaty hand, felt inadequate, a tiny beacon against an encroaching darkness. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, transforming familiar exhibits into grotesque, watchful figures. The Egyptian mummies, usually just dusty relics, now seemed to hold a malevolent gaze, their bandaged forms hinting at ancient secrets and restless spirits. I told myself to move, to complete my rounds, to dismiss it all as an overactive imagination fueled by too much coffee and the spooky ambiance. But my feet were rooted to the spot, a primal instinct screaming at me to run, even though there was nowhere to go. Then a flicker. Not a sound this time, but a movement in my peripheral vision. I spun around, sweeping the beam of my flashlight across the hall. Nothing, just the rows of display cases, the polished floors reflecting the dim security lights. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Was I hallucinating now? Was the isolation finally getting to me? I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, then opened them, determined to shake off the creeping paranoia. I forced myself to walk, my footsteps echoing eerily. My route was supposed to take me past the closed-off section, the very wing where the tapping had originated. Every step felt like wading through treacle. The air grew colder as I approached, a damp chill that seeped into my bones despite the museum's climate control. A faint metallic scent, like old blood and dust, began to prickle my nostrils. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but once I noticed it, it became overpowering. My stomach churned. The restricted sign on the heavy, bolted door seemed less like a warning to stay out and more like a desperate plea for something to stay in. I paused, my breath catching in my throat, staring at the old, tarnished brass plaque next to the door. It simply read, "The Uncatalogued Collection." Uncatalogued, not just undisplayed, but completely unaccounted for. What horrors did they keep locked away behind that door? And what or who was tapping from within? Standing there, my hand still clutched around the flashlight, my mind raced. Uncatalogued. The word reverberated in my head, a chilling echo of all the things that shouldn't exist, shouldn't be known. My eyes scanned the heavy oak door, dark with age, scarred with what looked like old, deep gouges near the bottom, as if something had tried to claw its way out, or in. The brass plaque, tarnished and barely legible, felt like a warning etched in rust. My breath hitched. The metallic tang in the air intensified, now undeniably smelling like old congealed blood, mixed with something else, something earthy and foul, like disturbed grave dirt. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around, to complete my rounds in the safe, well-lit sections, to ignore the whispers of the Blackwood Museum. But a morbid fascination, a terrible magnetic pull, held me captive. What was so dangerous, so unspeakable, that it couldn't even be listed in an inventory? What secrets lay behind that sealed door, guarded by silence and decay? Then a faint scratching sound, not the rhythmic tapping from before, but a dry, scuttling noise, like claws dragging across wood, coming from inside. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a pipe. It wasn't the wind. It was something alive, or something that had been alive. My flashlight beam trembled, dancing across the door, highlighting the intricate patterns of the wood grain, which suddenly seemed to twist and writhe like tormented faces. I took a shaky step closer, my heart hammering against my ribs so violently I thought it might burst. The air around the door grew even colder, a freezing pocket in the already chilly hall. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing on end, and a shiver, not of cold, but of pure terror, ran down my spine. My hand, as if acting independently, slowly reached out, hovering inches from the cold, rough wood. I could almost feel a faint vibration against my fingertips, a low, guttural thrumming that seemed to resonate from deep within the museum's foundations. I pressed my ear against the door, ignoring the metallic stench that now burned my nostrils. The scratching stopped. A heavy, drawn-out sigh seemed to emanate from within, a sound so profoundly sorrowful and ancient that it chilled me to my very core. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else, and it was waiting. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet remained glued to the spot, paralyzed by a terror that was slowly, inexorably, turning into something far worse. A desperate, suicidal curiosity. What was in there? I had to know. I had to see. Oh God, I had to see. My fingers, stiff and numb, found the cold brass handle. It wasn't locked. Not just unlocked, but it turned with an unnerving ease, a silent click that echoed like a gunshot in the suffocating quiet. A wave of even colder air, thick with that metallic, earthy stench, washed over me, making my eyes water and my throat constrict. Every instinct screamed at me to slam it shut, to run, but my hand was already pulling. The heavy oak door groaned, a sound like a dying beast, slowly swinging inward on rusted hinges. Darkness, absolute inky blackness, swallowed the beam of my flashlight, making it seem utterly useless. It was a darkness so profound it felt like a physical presence, a living void. But it wasn't empty. Oh God, it wasn't empty. The air was heavy, viscous, filled with a cacophony of whispers that weren't quite whispers, more like the faint murmur of 1,000 forgotten sorrows, all breathing the same ancient foul air. My light struggled, finally piercing a small circle in the oppressive black, and then I saw it, or part of it. In the center of the vast circular room, bathed in the struggling cone of my flashlight, was not an exhibit, not a display case, but a massive, gnarled tree trunk. Except it wasn't wood. It was bone, twisted, fused, ancient bone, rising from a mound of what looked like disturbed earth and crumbling, desiccated flesh. It pulsed faintly, a slow, visceral beat that I could feel in my own chest, mirroring my frantic heart. From its grotesque branches, hundreds of skeletal hands, some impossibly small, others huge and clawed, hung suspended by strands of black hair and sinew, swaying ever so slightly, as if stirred by an unseen breath. And then I heard it again, not a sigh this time, but a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the very floor beneath my feet, shaking my teeth. It came from the base of the bone tree, from a gaping, cavernous maw that opened in what I now realized was a monstrous, eyeless skull, far too large to be human. The scratching sound returned, louder now, a frantic scrabbling from within that mouth, as if something was desperately trying to claw its way out. The stench of blood became unbearable, stinging my nostrils, and I felt a warm, metallic trickle run down my own chin as I bit through my lip without realizing it. I was staring into the very heart of the Blackwood Museum's secret, a living, breathing horror that had been tapping, sighing, and waiting. And now, it wasn't just waiting, it was waking. The skeletal hands began to twitch, fingers slowly curling, reaching out into the darkness. My flashlight slipped from my grasp, plunging the room into absolute darkness, leaving me alone with the growl, the scrabbling, and the reaching hands. The darkness was a shroud, a living thing that pressed in, smothering any thought of escape. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was outside, gasping for air, the metallic tang of blood still in my throat, the stench of grave dirt clinging to my clothes. My hands were scraped and raw, my uniform torn. I was miles from the museum, huddled against a bus stop bench, shivering uncontrollably, even though the dawn was breaking. They found me there, rambling, incoherent. They called it a breakdown, a psychotic episode brought on by stress and isolation. They said I was dehydrated, hallucinating. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Every night the whispers return, 1,000 sorrows murmuring just beyond the edge of hearing. I still smell the blood, the earth, the decay. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see the bone tree, its skeletal fingers twitching, beckoning. I feel the thrumming in my chest, a phantom beat from that monstrous heart. They say I'm better now, that the medication helps. But how can you be better when a part of you is still trapped in that uncatalogued darkness, still listening to the scrabbling, still waiting for the growl? The Blackwood Museum holds more than just history. It holds secrets that claw their way into your soul and refuse to let go. Have you ever felt something similar? A darkness that followed you home, even after you thought you escaped? Because I know I'm not truly free.